WWE Saturday night's main event takes place on Saturday in Tampa, Florida, and we're going to make our predictions for all four matches that have currently been announced on the card. And we start with Drew McIntyre and Damian Priest, the steel cage match. These two, we know, have had a long running rivalry dating back for over a year now, right? It's been a while since these two have continued to sort of have their back and forth with each other. They've had different feuds outside of that along the way, but it all kind of comes back to them, right? And we thought that maybe the Sin City Street Fight at WrestleMania 41 would be kind of that point where these two would sort of move on to something else. Not the case. They're going to do this again as they do it inside a steel cage for the first time. And I think from this standpoint, when you look at this, right, the whole story has been about how Damian Priest has been the person that has screwed Drew McIntyre out of whatever he's been chasing, over the past little bit. That was McIntyre's whole thing heading into WrestleMania 41. Whether you go back to WrestleMania 40 and what happened there, whether you go back to what happened at Money in the Bank, and you continue on all these different points, right, that Drew McIntyre can bring up about how Damian Priest has screwed him over. Well, we also know that Drew McIntyre won at WrestleMania 41. He won the Sin City Street Fight, and even though we thought maybe that would be, kind of, again, something where these two would kind of go do something else, didn't happen at Backlash, where they were both involved in the four-way match, the United States Championship with Jacob Fatu and LA Knight in the mix. We know they've continued to kind of, push that with these two kind of being intertwined with that. But now it comes down to this. Both of them inside a steel cage. And I'm just looking at this and saying, well, you would think that obviously Drew McIntyre feels like the person who's going to move into bigger and better things, right? Maybe he can't get into that WWE Championship picture right now because McIntyre versus Cena probably isn't something they're going to do unless you're wanting to turn Drew McIntyre, which at certain points, I mean, the fans, I feel like, have certainly, cheered Drew McIntyre. And again, I think it goes back to saying, well, he says a lot of things that are true. And so I say all that to tell you that I feel like Damian Priest probably has to win this one, even though I can certainly give you a lot more reasons as to why McIntyre can sort of move into, that next tier of whatever that is for the World Championship picture. I suppose, he could be moved over to Raw potentially, kind of get into that very crowded scene for the World Heavyweight Championship. But for now, with Cena holding the WWE title, I don't know that that's kind of your next move here. And so maybe you do Drew McIntyre, Jacob Fatu, you do more of that coming out of it. But I just think Priest probably has to win this one, right? Do you want Drew McIntyre to beat him again just after they did sort of a stipulation match a month ago at WrestleMania 41? I feel like this is one where I'm going to pick Priest, even though I can probably give you a lot more reasons as to why I think McIntyre is probably the person, that certainly comes out of this in maybe a more featured, prominent spot. But I'm going to pick Priest to win this match, and maybe that does sort of settle the feud between the two. You get the babyface getting the win, and then, again, we kind of see them go their separate directions now into the summer and elsewhere. Jey Uso will defend the World Heavyweight Championship against Logan Paul. And we know that, as I said, it's a pretty crowded scene on Raw right now when it comes to the world title picture. I mentioned that in the previous video I did talking about Sami Zayn and Jey Uso and maybe what Sami's motivation is. We'll get to Sami in a second when we talk about the big tag team match. But for now, you've got Jey, who is having to deal with Logan Paul on this show. You've got the possibility of Jey having to deal with Gunther on June 9th in Phoenix. You've got the possibility of Jey having to have rematches with Seth Rollins and Bron Breakker at some point here in the future. But that all depends on whether Jey can keep the title, right? Can he keep the championship? Can he hold off Logan Paul, the Maverick? Or is he going to, take the title and go on to have a match with Gunther? And Gunther will get another shot at a celebrity in the ring, just like he did with Pat McAfee. That was the basis of their promo segment on Raw this week. Well, you guys know who I'm picking in this one. I'm picking Jey Uso because I think Jey is going to retain the championship, and I think you're going to get that rematch with Gunther, which I think will be very fascinating. We'll talk more about that coming out of this show. But really, the question is here, right? How does this play out? Because do you think that Gunther somehow is involved in this match in some way, shape, or form? Depending on when they do this, I could certainly see this, and I think they, maybe even mentioned it on Raw. I'm not exactly sure. The wording was, I wasn't really understanding if they were trying to say it a certain way, but this may be your main event because it is for the World Heavyweight Championship, meaning it may go on last. Now, remember, it's Saturday night's main event. The way WWE has always sort of set that up, the maybe top match has not always gone on last, which I think you could certainly argue that of these four matches that have been announced, this one probably is, kind of right there in the middle for a lot of people, whereas the next two we're going to talk about maybe a little bit more high profile for different reasons. But if this is kind of the last one, on the card, we have Jey getting a big, successful World Heavyweight title defense in the main event, at least the one that goes on last. That's a significant thing. Doing this on NBC and Jey kind of getting, another kind of victory here to continue this championship run, again, knowing that he's got a lot of challengers in his path. And that's where, maybe you do kind of the scene where Jey wins somehow. Maybe it's just a straight up win, right? Logan Paul tries to use nefarious means to get the victory, but Jey walks out as the champion. You kind of have the stare down maybe with Gunther. Who knows what has happened before this match? If it does go on last, you have some interactions again with Seth Rollins and Bron Breakker that you really push the idea that, there's just a lot of this sort of adversity that Jey's going to have to overcome to beat this to beat the champion for a long-term sort of scenario, because he does have all these very worthy opponents waiting for him. And so, like I said, we'll see what happens before this match, and maybe it doesn't go on last. Maybe it kind of goes on first. Maybe you put it somewhere in the middle, however they decide to do it. But any way you slice it, I think Jey Uso is walking out as the World Heavyweight Champion, and I think that sets up a pretty, as I mentioned, very, very interesting, I think, moving forward for Jey Uso, just because you are going to have that rematch with Gunther. How do they do that one? And then how do you get back to the obvious stuff? You would think with Seth Rollins, and of course, how does it tie into Sami Zayn? All this other stuff. There's a lot more to work with if Jey is your champion. So I think that will certainly be something that plays out there. Maybe Tyrese Halliburton. I think he may be busy with the Eastern Conference Finals to get involved in this one, but some way, shape, or form, Jey's going to walk out as the champion. And then you do have the tag team match. CM Punk and Sami Zayn taking on Seth Rollins and Bron Breakker. Like I said, the placement of this could maybe tell us a lot about how this whole thing could unfold, because I think you could really, go in a very interesting order here with these 4 matches, with the way you kind of have them structured, because they all do feel like big matches, right? Again, we mentioned even Priest and McIntyre doing this again by adding the stipulation it's a steel cage match. Like, that is an attraction here for an NBC show. And so I think from that standpoint, all of these matches are fascinating. And so you can put them in any order. And I'm kind of curious to see what order they go in. Like I said, knowing kind of your traditional Saturday night's main event setup and the way they used to do it, kind of putting on your top match early and then kind of maybe closing with, I don't want to call them lesser than matches because you only got 4 here. But, it's kind of the way they structure it could mean a lot here. So how does this one go, right? Because like we said, they very clearly teased the hatred and just the issues, the personal issues, right? Personal issues draw money. We always say it, the late Jerry Jarrett. There are a lot of personal issues between these 4. And we know that Seth Rollins, the whole goal is the power, right? He's playing the long-term game. He wants the championship, but it is more maybe even about the power and having everything kind of go their way here with this whole new dangerous alliance with Paul Heyman and Bron Breakker. And how does this go? Because there'd be nothing sweeter, right, than for Seth Rollins to get a big win over CM Punk. Again, like, that's what you're looking at, because he does have that history with Punk, right? He also has the history with Sami Zayn. And so, how does that play in? And we've talked about in that previous video. Check it out if you haven't already. Me kind of giving my updated thoughts on the Sami Zayn, motivation and the way they could play this thing out kind of moving forward with Jey Uso. And how does it involve Rollins? How does it involve Breakker and all this other stuff? But I think this is one where a lot of people, as I mentioned in that video, are asking the question, is Sami Zayn going to turn on CM Punk? Well, I just think from a timing standpoint, I don't know if that's the move you make right now. As I say never. But if you really think about maybe what gets you the furthest coming out of this, we know WWE is not afraid of doing the slow burn, right? It's letting this thing play out over time. And I think from that standpoint, if you're looking at this, there's only one team that can win this match, in my opinion, and that is Seth Rollins and Bron Breakker, because you are establishing these two as this sort of unstoppable force on Raw right now. I mean, think about the matches they've had, right? Even though they've been unsuccessful in capturing the championship from Jey Uso when Rollins had the opportunity, because, of course, Punk returned and all this other stuff. But when you think about how this has played out, like, they've still protected these two pretty well. And I think knowing that when you have kind of the backstage stuff with Breakker taking out Jey and all these sort of intertwining they've done between the top challengers for that World Heavyweight Championship and just the personal nature of the feud between these guys, I think it becomes pretty clear here that Rollins and Breakker have to win, right? And I don't know if you just do kind of a cheap finish, right? Which would not maybe surprise us if you walk out with a DQ or, count out, something like that. I don't think the fans will be very happy if that happens. But if you wanted to do some sort of cheap finish here, you've got to have something bigger planned if that happened. But I think the most logical scenario here to where you get the most out of this with the whole story is probably Sami Zayn getting pinned. And whether that comes via, a miscommunication with Punk, whether that comes via something else that ties in, with his history with Rollins, or somehow Heyman gets involved. Again, is Jey involved here? Where does this placement on the card kind of play into this kind of stuff? So I think, that's where if this were to be the match that goes on last or something, right? Then maybe you're talking about, okay, that opens up a few more things. Do I think the Sami Zayn heel turn is happening here? I don't. I think the timing maybe makes more sense for Sami to simply get pinned here. But is there a third man? If there's a third man, does he get involved here? Is that how this all plays out? And if it's not Sami, who is it, right? Those are the questions that people are asking right now. And to me, those are all possible scenarios here. But I think, again, any way you sort of do this match, whether it is an outside interference from a third man, whether you're rooting for the Sami Zayn heel turn, whatever you think is going to happen, I think no matter what, it has to be Seth Rollins and Bron Breakker getting the win here. And most likely, I would think Sami Zayn is on the losing end of this. Or could you do something where maybe you get a bigger surprise, where Bron Breakker perhaps pins CM Punk or something to set up a huge one-on-one match between those two at SummerSlam or somewhere else in the near future? Could that happen? That would certainly give you a big boost, right? For Bron Breakker to get a pinfall win over CM Punk. Could they do it that way? That's also a possibility. So, a lot of ways you can go with this, but to me, it's some combination of Rollins and Breakker winning. It's just who do they pin and what are sort of the allegiances on the babyface side here when it comes to maybe Sami Zayn and his future, like we said, relationship with Jey Uso and the friendship there. How does it all play into that? We'll see. But I'm picking Rollins and Breakker. All right, and that does lead us to John Cena taking on R-Truth. This is not going to be, as we said, sort of your traditional maybe John Cena match. But there is a lot potentially at play with this one when we talk about what this can mean for John Cena as he goes through this farewell tour, right? R-Truth has professed his love for the hustle, loyalty, and respect. There's no one, maybe on this earth, that R-Truth loves more than John Cena. His hero, his childhood hero, right? Trying to pattern everything in his career after John Cena. Well, I think this may be something where, for John Cena, the truth may set him free here when it comes to this, because what happens if John Cena realizes that he goes through R-Truth here, right? He has to take out someone that obviously he's had this just very unique relationship with over the years in WWE. What happens if John Cena has to take out R-Truth? Then the truth becomes that John Cena has basically become someone that he doesn't even know anymore, right? He has to look in the mirror and realize that he just hit an AA on R-Truth at the press conference after Backlash. Maybe cheats to win again here, and you get another one of those kind of, screwy finishes with John Cena getting the victory. Or maybe it's sort of, Gunther Pat McAfee style, where Truth gets in some early sort of offense, and then Cena just completely decimates the guy. But at some point, this is another sort of reflection kind of period for John Cena. Whatever he does here is going to play into the ultimate endgame for John Cena when we get to the end of this farewell tour in December. This has to be another kind of pivotal moment for him in terms of the character reflection, however you want to phrase it, right? That's what this has to be with John Cena, because we know he's going to win the match. I'd be surprised if R-Truth gets a surprise win. I really would. But again, never say never. It's professional wrestling. But if you're really looking at this, you're probably going to give Truth a lot of potential, offense here, give him a chance to really do something different. Because again, it's not as though R-Truth's coming out wanting to destroy John Cena. So what do you do to get to that point where Truth decides, hey, he has to knock some sense into Cena? And I think he said as much, in one of those previous promos he did. Maybe he has to be the guy that just sort of knocks some sense into John, because he doesn't know this John Cena, right? And so maybe that's how you kind of play it up. So R-Truth all of a sudden, brings out his aggressive side. Cena's kind of taunting, maybe slapping him, all this other stuff, and then Truth tries to slap some sense into him. Do I think this is going to be full comedy? No, I don't, because you have to bring out kind of that next edge for John Cena. And so if you do it that way, Cena's going to win. I don't think there's a lot of, sort of suspense on who's going to win this match probably. But really, to me, it then comes down to, are there any big surprises here when we talk about potential returns? Well, the way things ended at Backlash, even though it was one last time, John Cena, Randy Orton, I don't know, does Randy Orton really want to leave it that way, right? Does he really want to leave it where that's the last opportunity he gets at John Cena, where he feels like he got screwed? And so if not, well, then could you go back to John Cena and Randy Orton? Listen, there have been taglines before. Once in a lifetime, John Cena versus The Rock all of a sudden came twice in a lifetime the next year, just because, well, it made sense to do it again. Does it make sense to do Cena versus Orton again? Do they decide to do that maybe at Money in the Bank or something like that? Could that be a potential option? I suppose. But again, you're kind of the one last time tagline means nothing a month later. That doesn't mean a whole lot, but I mean, you could possibly do that because Orton, you would think, wants some sort of revenge there based on how the match finished. Or you could just move on from the Orton stuff and then turn your focus to Cody Rhodes, who we talked about in a previous video this week as well. If you're looking at Cody Rhodes' WWE return, when is that going to happen? Well, it's got to happen pretty soon, you would think, because if you are setting up a big match for Cody at SummerSlam coming up in, several months now, you would think that they want him back for sort of this summer run here, whether it's having a match at Money in the Bank, somehow being involved on that show. You've got some stuff, as we said. It seems like there's some big announcements coming for some huge, bigger kind of live event shows out there, whether that's kind of, we talked about the Worlds Collide show in Los Angeles as well. Not saying Cody's going to be on that show, but maybe a big show coming up in Mexico, something like that. That seemed to be one of the rumors out there this week. So Cody's got to come back. And if I'm saying, hey, where's a great place to bring Cody Rhodes back on NBC to have kind of that stare down and make it very clear that he is taking aim at John Cena to get that championship back, it would make a lot of sense to do it here, right? So from that standpoint, I think that's probably the story of maybe how this plays out. But like I said, it's really the match order here. Like, how do they do this? They may have something big planned no matter what the order is. But I think this would be a logical place if you want to bring Cody back. You do it on NBC. With all kind of the, this worldwide type exposure here, the way you kind of play this up, and maybe someone has to save R-Truth, right? And again, could that be Orton? Could it be Cody Rhodes? How do they want to play this? I think that's really the big question here. It's not really a question of who wins the match. It's the question of how does this play into the next program for John Cena and ultimately getting you back to, as we said, that big rematch with Cody, or as we've also talked about, the potential tag team match with John Cena and Travis Scott teaming up against Cody, and someone could be Bad Bunny, could be someone else. So that's the way I see this playing out. But there you go, guys. My thoughts on Saturday night's main event. Give me your predictions. Who do you think's going to win each of these four matches? How do you see it playing out? Do you see any huge surprises? Any huge turns? Any huge returns? Lots of possibilities on this show. Let me know what you think. Always appreciate your feedback, and hit that subscribe button, hit the like button as well. Let me know your thoughts and predictions for the WWE Saturday night's main event.